begin with a reading. The story so far. In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move. Many races believe that it was created by some sort of a god, although the Jatravartid people of Viltvota VI believe the entire universe was in fact sneezed out of the nose of a being called Great Green Arcala-Caesar. The Jatravartids, who live in perpetual fear of the time they call the coming of the Great White Handkerchief, are small blue creatures with more than 50 arms each, who are therefore unique in being the only race in history to have invented the aerosol deodorant before the wheel. However, the Great Green Arcala-Caesar theory is not widely accepted outside Voldel VI, and so, the universe being the puzzling place it is, other explanations are constantly being sought. For instance, a race of hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings once built themselves a gigantic supercomputer called Deep Thought to calculate once and for all the ultimate answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. For 7.5 million years, Deep Thought computed and calculated, and in the end announced that the answer was, in fact, 42. And so another, even bigger computer had to be built to find out what the actual question was. And this computer, which was called the Earth, was so large that it was frequently mistaken for a planet, especially by the strange ape-like beings who roamed its surface, totally unaware that they were simply part of a gigantic computer program. And this is very odd, because without that very simple and obvious piece of knowledge, nothing that ever happened on the Earth could possibly make the slightest bit of sense. So welcome everybody, good morning. Does anyone know who that, I'm sure a couple people know, who's that reading by? The science fiction writer Douglas Adams. About the one explanation of the beginning of everything and the meaning of life. So I want to ask, did you have an opportunity to be amazed in the last 24 hours?
Yes. Yes.
Fantastic. Good, good. My moment was seeing 4 generations contra dance in a college cafeteria. Life is not a beautiful thing. I don't know what you call it. It's wonderful. So I'm glad that you had that opportunity to be amazed yesterday. And if you didn't, hopefully one will apply itself in the next 24 hours. So the meaning of life, I promised I would begin with that. And Douglas Adams, as many of you know, is a beloved, famous science fiction writer who died a few years ago. And in this very funny piece, he presents a kind of very serious thought experiment. What if there was a computer that could decide the meaning of life? And we're so advanced in computers, we can almost imagine it, right? I mean, you could almost do it. The problem would be that you would have to give the computer the parameters, right? So you'd say, like, if you said that sunsets are meaningful, you could easily design a computer now that would say, sunsets, that's where meaning is. And they would find everything even related to a sunset, and you'd be all set. But you've already decided the parameters, right? Or if you said it's meaningful when people get together in community, you could easily design a computer to kind of detect that, and to notice it and say, that's where meaning is, and the computer could do it. But it's so hard to find the meaning of life because we're probably not entirely agreed on what the parameters are. What is it that we would put in that computer to decide what's meaningful on life? So I want to begin by asking you to get into groups of 3 or 4, and maybe what the meaning of life is a difficult question for a Tuesday morning or any morning. But I want you to each spend maybe about 30 seconds, so briefly, in your groups of 3 or 4, say one time in your life when you felt meaningful. So you don't have to say what's the meaning of life, but what's a time when you felt meaningful? And in that 30 seconds, you can say who you were, what you were doing. I always invite the senses, you know, the smells, the tastes, what it sounded like, what you noticed, the bit on the wall, any of that. And finally, what made it meaningful to you? So I invite you to do that in small groups. Just say one meaningful experience in your life. And I invite you, if you can finish up now, if everybody's had a chance, and get back to your seats. I knew I was being a little unfair when I said discuss the meaning of life when you have 5 minutes, but thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. And hopefully conversations can be continued later in the day. A word on time. I knew I ran late last time, so I'm going to make sure. I didn't realize that it was 10:15. We're going to make sure we finish at 10:15 to get you to workshops, so I will make sure you can hold me to that, please. So, I don't know what all of you discussed, but it sounded like everybody was able to come up with a time when you felt meaningful, when life felt meaningful. And they were probably very different. I'm sure there were some similarities. I tend to notice that what people, having done some of this exercise before, people feel connected to something. Often it's people, but not necessarily. It can be out in nature, feeling connected to the world, or feeling connected to one's hobbies or work or pursuit, but that feeling of some sort of connection is often a part of it, and there's often some sort of a there's a flow to it. There's kind of a bliss to it often, though the flow can be very different from person to person. But one of the things I also want to say, as well as the similarities, is there are a lot of differences. And as I said with the computer, meaning is what we make of it. And if you ask somebody what the meaning of life is, it'll vary a lot according to what the person is. And this is nothing new. I mean, Aristotle, among others, said this. If you ask an artist, they're going to say, well, it's beauty. Beauty is what makes life meaningful. It's beauty. Everyone, if you ask a philosopher, will say, well, it's truth. Obviously, it's truth that makes life meaningful. And somebody who's close to people or whose passion in life involves those around them, whether the people they work with or family, they're going to say, well, it's people, it's our connections, it's people that make us meaningful. And there really is, I don't think there is this one answer about what makes life meaningful, and I think Douglas Adams was quite wise in saying that. And another way of saying this is the existentialists. You know, Sartre and Camus said that your life is really up to you to make it what it is. We put our own meaning on our life, or as Sartre's phrase, existence precedes essence. So there is no like essential, like this is what it means to be alive. We get to choose. It's wonderful, it's liberating, it's freedom. You know, existentialists weren't just dour people who sat around in cafes smoking Gauloises. They also sat outside of cafes. No, but there's a freedom to this philosophy that we do get to decide to make meaning in our lives. So the way that we make meaning in our lives is really important. I mean, there is so much that depends on perspective. Because what happens in our lives, a lot of it's the same, right? I mean, there are people who have incredible years that are just so hard that you just go, you know, it's just terrible. Everything seems to happen at once. But in general, we all, if we're lucky, we deal with aging. We all suffer losses. We all lose people that we love and care about. We all deal with pains. We're all mortified and embarrassed sometimes. We all have triumphs and joys. We all celebrate at moments when life is bliss. And there are variations in this, of course, but in general, we all have these kind of human experiences. So how we experience them is very important. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today with spiritual growth for beginners. And as we said, we're all beginners. I think if I said spiritual growth, you know, I'm an expert on spiritual growth. I think you should run screaming. There's something about that. I mean, I think about the Dalai Lama. He always seems to take each day as a beginner, you know, and what an amazing example that is. So we have, thanks to Ken and Maya, we're going to do we're going to demonstrate this very briefly. And thank you for volunteering at the last moment. We're going to do a tale of two leaf piles. So I invite Ken and Maya, if you would go first. Two leaf piles. Sorry.
Oh, it's so beautiful. This lake is inspiring. Don't you see the color? It's such a vivid red. This fire from the tree just falls down to the earth, making the circle of life one again. This leaf will become a beautiful flower one day. It will inspire, that flower will probably inspire many artists. It maybe crowds a whole new revolution of artists. Who knows? This one leaf has so much potential just because it's veins, it has depth, it is everything that there is in life. But just because it fell from the tree does not mean that it has no meaning.
Good.